Thank you very much. Yes, so this work I will present today is actually a collaboration between a biologist, an engineer, and two physicists. So it's really interdisciplinary. In total, our group in Göttingen is tackling problems of network dynamics. So and today I will, so essentially biological neural network modeling. But today I will go into artificial neural networks and asking the question how collective nonlinear dynamics can be used to be brought to use in autonomous systems. And for those of you who are mathematicians, autonomous systems here means something like robots, not non-driven systems. Yeah, as I mentioned, can we move the table? As I mentioned, we are working on mathematical modeling of a broad spectrum of networks, ranging over a large range of spatial and temporal scales from milliseconds to years, and from something like micrometers to kilometers. And our main focus is on neural networks. So this is a picture of a human brain. I hope every one of you brought one of these items with you. It makes you autonomous. And this is a picture of a pyramidal cell. There are about of the order of 200 different types of nerve cells in your brain. And the total number of cells is about 10 to the 10 or 10 to the 11. So 100 billion. The guy I will talk about today is Amos. He is sitting on the grass here, and he is developing himself towards being an autonomous system. Yeah. The topic of today is towards neuro-inspired autonomous systems, and I will use principles of nonlinear dynamics and self-organization to steer these systems. In general, there are different types of biomechanics used in animals, and we are trying to transfer some of the principles there. So different types include wings for flying, or different, how's it called, flossen? Fins for swimming. Actually, the mammals have, so this is a shark having a fin which is vertical, and you can distinguish from mammals like whales or dolphins, which have back fins which are horizontal. And we are mainly interested in these guys, which also can fly, but also can walk. And our Amos cannot fly yet, but there are different gait patterns, and there are different turning patterns and hiding patterns, and so on. And in general, they are very simple motor actions, which are reflexes. So the local motor responds to a local sensation. For example, you know it from an old story from if you go to the doctor and he touches your knee at the right point, and your knee goes up automatically because it's not really processed in a high-level processing in the brain, but it's more or less done by your spine. So it just goes one synapse up to your spine, and there's a local processing, and it initiates the reflex. More complicated patterns are reaction patterns to changing environments. For example, if you walk, then I can, as a human, I can go like that. And 2 days ago, I was brought to hike. And depending on the slope, you go a different gait. You go, for example, like this. Or if the slope gets larger, you go like that. And if you remember being a child, you start romping around and crawling and so on. So there are different types of patterns, and for insects, the spectrum is actually at least as large. And typically, there are small circuits responsible for producing a certain pattern. This is a pattern not for motor generation, it's not for gait generation, but for controlling the digesting movement of the stomatic gastric ganglion of lobster. And this small circuit is actually not 4 neurons, but it's about 12, depending on which you count in. There are 4 different types of neurons, so that's why there are double or triple symbols here. And this so-called central pattern generator generates a periodic output, or almost periodic output, which then creates the motor pattern for the digesting organ. But this pattern is fixed, and this kind of distributed neuronal motor control requires an understanding of the nonlinear dynamics and self-organization in these systems. So one question is how is it possible that this neural network is generating such a nice periodic output? This is the question several theoretical biologists try to answer, and we are also working on actually exactly this system. But today I will answer the question how a technical system can achieve different kinds of periodic outputs with only one of these circuits. 2 core processes support the autonomy of robots or artificial systems. One is adaptivity, by which I mean short-term and reversible changes to environmental changes, response to environmental changes essentially. And the second is learning, so long-term change which is sustained and which enables the system to react to a given situation, to a repeating situation in the right way after learning. These processes are also nonlinear. They typically induce self-organized emergent collective states, where I don't want to debate self-organized. It's certainly not, I'm not sure, but I wouldn't call it cognitive, because our system cannot think about possible options. It just reacts at the moment. And one aspect we are addressing also is, can it be realized in a neuroanalogous way? So can you set up a system which a natural biological system could also build in a very similar way? So it's a kind of bio-inspired development, and it also provides a possible explanation for biological phenomena like pattern generation. Yeah, this is AMOS. It's a long abbreviation actually, which I always forget again. This I think stands for autonomous mobile system, and this I forgot, and this is the number of legs. And the biomechanics has been developed by programmate Manon Pong during his PhD thesis, actually during his free time. It took 4 years to develop this guy, and he first did it like besides his normal PhD project, and at the end he used it for his PhD project. And the aim was to realize biomechanically a large number of possible options of behaviors the system has, and this guy ends up having about 15 of the order of 15 different kinds of behaviors which can be steered. If you have a remote control, you can just get 15 different items. And this is if you let them run for free. This is the grounds of University of Göttingen. And one of the steps which was missing was to make it, this biomechanical item, to make it autonomous such that it behaves in a changing environment. And so of course there's standard steering and like hardwired artificial intelligence gate control, but of the modern methods there's a neuronal control which seems to be more adapted to these complex systems. And a standard approach here is to use one central pattern generator for each gate. So if you have gate number 1, which might be a normal hex support, normal gate, standard gate, for example, slow wave gate, you take a certain output of one central pattern generator, which generates a periodic output. You take the second gate, you take a second central pattern generator, and so on. And so if you have like 5 or 6 gates, you need 5 or 6 different central pattern generators. So you need 5 items of either program or hardware. And the problem is, if you have many of these, you need to coordinate them. It's unclear how you coordinate a large number of central pattern generators. So for example, if you want gate 2, you need to switch on central pattern generator 2, but you also need to switch off all the other ones. And if you now want to learn something about that, you need to coordinate learning among the central pattern generators. So coordination and learning is a bit hard in these systems, and that's why the world record was like 3 different classes of gates, not actually gates, but waving movements of a snake-like artificial animal to be controlled in an autonomous sensory-driven way. And now we try to overcome this small number restriction by using a nonlinear dynamic solution. We use a method called chaos control. You have a system which is chaotic, so it behaves very irregularly, but it's known from nonlinear dynamics that in most of these systems there are unstable periodic orbits embedded which are unstable, and there are methods to stabilize these such that the output of the system with a small external force, actually non-invasive force, becomes periodic. And our idea was to implement this one in a neuronal way, so a biological system could realize it as well, and also in an adaptive way such that the control strengths, as I will show in a few minutes, will change. So the main idea here is to replace the set of different central pattern generators by one single central pattern generator that is controlled to any selected period. So you can essentially, you have one hardware piece or one central pattern generator here, and you can control for different periodic outputs which then correspond to different gates. Yes, this makes the coordination and learning much simpler. It allows to use several gates and actually different types of gates, and it also allows for constructive use of chaos, as I will show later. So as I mentioned, the main problem is how to coordinate many sensors with many motors in an autonomous way. So you have a high-dimensional input space of, in our case, I think we have 18 functioning sensors. The total number of sensors is 20, so the green arrows here point to sensors. And there are different types of sensors, like infrared sensors, light sensors, slope sensors, gyro sensors, foot contact sensors, each of the feet, and a sound sensor from behind, many more. So you have a 18-dimensional or 20-dimensional sensor input space, and depending on the combination of all these sensory inputs, the task is to react in an appropriate way. For example, if there's nothing special, so no special sensor except a foot contact in a normal way, then you just walk in a so-called standard gate. So the hexapod walks in a standard gate just forward. If there are obstacles, you want to avoid the obstacle. If there's a slope, you want to change the gate to walk a bit slower, for example. If you walk down slope, you want also to use another gate. If you want to do phototaxis, which is something like chemotaxis, but we don't have chemicals, so use light as a food source, so to speak. Want the robot to run towards the light if it's not hungry anymore, so after eating it rests. I will show this later. This is a schematic of the same guy. You see the 6 legs with 3 joints each. There's a back joint as well, and each of the leg joints has one motor. So there's 3 different types of motors here. And the green guys are also, again, the sensors. And the output we will generate, I'll show in the next slides, is very many behavioral patterns at the same time. We had actually 11 of them, 11 behavioral patterns, which I think is a world record for an autonomous biologically inspired system. It can walk in 5 different gates, it can turn and escape, it can untrap itself, it can do phototaxis and rest and many other things. And the problem how to solve this complex coordination task was, as I said, replacing many central pattern generators by one single central pattern generator here. So you have, this is the brain, if you like, of Amos. There's neural preprocessing of the sensory signal, which essentially denoises and rectifies somehow the sensory signals. Then most of the sensors feed directly the central pattern generator. And actually what is fed in is only a processed signal which already determines which gate should come out. And there's a central pattern generator where the determined signal here, which is a period, say 5, is fed into the central pattern generator, and what comes out is a periodic signal of period 5. It is post-processed, but this one is now fixed, so the only adaptive thing, the only changing unit is this two neuron circuit. And then it's post-processed and distributed over a neural motor control circuit, which is a phase switching network and a velocity regulating network. For example, the velocity regulating network does determine whether you turn right or left. So if you one of your light detection sensors sees an obstacle on the right hand side, then it bypasses this gate processing and regulates the post-processing network such that the right legs move a bit larger, so a bit larger step, so you turn a bit to the left during walking if you see an obstacle on your right, and the same is true if you see an obstacle on the left. Okay, then these are distributed to the motors, and the animal moves and changes its own environment defined by the sensory inputs, and then you have the sensory motor loop going on. So this, the central pattern generator itself is just two discrete neurons, discrete time we use, and continuous variables, single variable per neuron, x1 and x2. And there are only 3 synapses. One is excitatory, and there's one inhibitory self-synapse and an inhibitory synapse from 1 to 2. There are 2 thresholds in a standard way, and there are 2 control signals controlling the states of the 2 neurons. And these control signals essentially depend on the period. I will first explain the idea. So first you can pick all these, So of course these thresholds and all the synaptic strengths and so on, and even the nonlinearity of the neural network here have some free parameters, and the question is how to determine these. And our aim was to pick them in a robust way such that the system is guaranteed to exhibit chaos and for these parameters and also for nearby parameters. So what we studied was, this is an example, the dynamics of the average network output, so x1 plus x2 over 2, as a function of the parameters. And here you see if you keep some other parameters fixed, you vary the self-synapse W11, and you get a periodic solution, period 1, then you get something like chaos here, and then you get period 4, and again a chaotic window, and here you get period doubling for those who know, period 2, period 4, period 8, and so on, and after some time you get chaos again. And we are...
Why is it average? Isn't average just...
Well, you can also plot the first, but then you have to sit up here all the time. It's just nicer to view.
Okay, so it's the behavior after some...
Yeah, it's after the transient, yes. So the transient is very well, it's short compared to the cycle time you actually need. So if you, I will show in a minute as well. So this is the output of neuron 2. And what you see already, this is it's I don't know. Yeah, well, it's either close to 1 or it's close to 0. And that's why we plot the average here. So the chaotic one is just like that. There's no periodic pattern, and it's also unpredictable. If you start with a nearby initial condition, you would follow that trajectory for a short time, but then you would diverge from that. If you can also stabilize different periodic orbits by a signal I will explain in 2 slides. And then you can get these different periods from the same point. So you fix the parameters. And the message here is the chaos embeds typically infinitely many unstable periodic orbits, which you can somehow stabilize. And the message is just these orbits are intrinsic in the dynamics. They're within these attractors. Now you can do this. So this was 1 parameter change, and this is now 2 parameters, and you can actually do it for all. And then you find where the intrinsic system has different periods. And the black area is an interesting one. It's a chaotic regime. And we pick a point which is more or less central in this chaotic regime. Of course, this is numerically found, so we cannot really compute mathematically where a good point is, but numerically we find that this is a very good choice where you can change the parameters slightly and you still are in a chaotic regime everywhere. So now these are the equations for those who like equations. The state of the of neuron I at time t plus 1 is a sigmoidal rise function, sigmoidal transfer function where there's a threshold, which is negative or positive. Then there's a summed input of the previous time's state of neuron 1 and 2. And then there's a control signal, which is depending on I, so on the neuron, and it depends on the period. So this is a sigmoid rise function. It's just a function like that, sigmoid. These are the parameters picked by numerical analysis to ensure that the 2-neuron system is chaotic. The most important thing here is this one, which just says that there's no need of a third non-zero, of a fourth non-zero synapse. So this synapse can be absent. Now, how can you control the chaotic dynamics to actually become periodic? And in nonlinear dynamics, there's the notion of time delay feedback control. It's also, I think, in control theory in engineering. The basic quantity is the time delayed feedback signal. It's a state of neuron J at time t, and you subtract the state a period p or some time p before, and your goal period is now p. You want, for example, 5, then you take the current state and the state 5 steps ago, and you want them to be equal. So if you have a periodic 5 orbit, this one would be 0. So then the control signal is a weighted sum of these time-delayed feedback signals, and it has some control strength, mu of t, and typically this control strength was fixed, in standard control theory is fixed, and we took it also to be adaptive, so you change the control signal proportional to the distance from your periodic orbit. So this is the square distance, and you divide by p for heuristic reasons, because we know that stabilization needs to be slower for larger periods. So if we use this control strategy, then this adaptive neuron chaos control can control the chaotic signal. So here is the red and the green are output of neuron 1 and 2, and the blue again is the average. And here it just shows it's chaotic. You can stabilize it to period 1. So it's the parameters are now fixed. Yeah? You can stabilize to period 1 with appropriate signal. You can stabilize to period, well, not to 3 actually. You can stabilize to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and many others. And in general, we find that for a range of parameters, we can stabilize a large number of periodic orbits at the same parameters, just giving different control signals. So we found that 20 to 25 different periodic orbits of different period may be stabilized. And one of the referees told us that this is actually, in the standard dynamics, even not possible for a non-neuronal control. So this is also new from chaos control theory point of view. you can typically like control 6 or 7 in a robust way. So you want, of course, in theory, you can control all of them, but actually you cannot. And ours was then built in software and transferred to hardware, which is actually working. So this adaptive neural control circuit approach solves a high-dimensional sensory motor coordination problem, and it in particular can generate different kinds of gates. So this is now the output signal to the motors. So this is the left leg number 1, left 2, left 3, and I think it's front to back. So this is the last, the back left leg, this one. And this is the front right leg, that one. And white means the leg is in the air, and blue means it's on the ground. So most of the time all legs are on the ground, and then you lift one, and this is why this is called slow wave gate. You move one leg after the other, first all the left ones, then all the right, first all the right ones, then all the left ones, and all the right ones, and so on. You have the same pattern in a fast wave gate, which in our processing works with period 8. Then there's a different gate called transition gate, a tetrapod gate, and a tripod gate. Tetrapod gate is something which imitates four-legged animals. The hexapod selects the first 4 legs to walk as a four-legged animal, and thereafter it selects the last 4 legs and walks like a four-legged animal, whereas the other 2 are always fixed. Yeah, in total there's a large behavioral repertoire, and it's autonomously coordinated. Here we built this is a cartoon of a parkour we built. And the task is to run on a flat terrain with a certain gate, then you avoid an obstacle, run up a slope, change the gate to climb the slope, avoid another obstacle. Then there's a rough terrain here. The robot falls with one leg into a hole. Then if the foot contact sensor becomes one of the legs is not touching the ground for a longer time, then it switches off all control, so it goes back to a chaotic state, and then it chaotically moves and it untraps itself with the chaos. Then it walks down, actually there's a second hole, then it walks down and changes the gate again, does phototaxis, runs towards the light source, and then if it's satisfied, it's not hungry anymore in some sense, then it rests, and the condition we put is just bright enough light. And for that I have a... Yes? Yeah, it has like 20 sensors, 18 of them are functional in the experiment we have. And the hole, for example, so the slope, for example, there's a slope sensor. Yes. That's right. So if this is like you do as well, if you climb a mountain and it's too steep, you just use your hands. And in some sense it's fixed on the short term, but of course you didn't use it the first time. So as I said, as a child you first start robbing around on the ground, and at some point you discover, well, maybe walking is faster, and then you use walking. And later we will show one experiment, 1 out of 2 we did to demonstrate that you can also learn all these features. But learning here is, as a child, it takes like 2 years or something. That's why I don't show all the learning, but in principle it can be learned, and it's actually simpler due to the single central pattern generator approach. I will show this parkour now. Vollbildsteuerung. So it does all kinds of... This is parkour. So these are, well, this is electricity and actually the software line. So you can run on a battery and on a PDA, which is then mounted to the back, which is not here at the moment. So this is the first obstacle. It runs around that obstacle.
So what's the physical size of the obstacle?
Well, these are truck wheels. No, this it's about 40 centimeters so there's a tail here, and the tail is just for fun. Plus there's a camera on top.
Is it a sting, the tail?
Yeah, it's like that, but it doesn't harm anyone. So essentially it's for fun, yeah. But there's also a camera which we use for some other kinds of experiments where you actually track the view of the guy itself. So this was a slope.
So it actually sees the obstacle.
Yeah, it detects it. Yeah. Everywhere there are sensors here. And it detects the obstacle and then turns around. So the only thing it does is it feels there's a closer obstacle on one side, which leads to moving the legs on that side a bit faster in the same, but keeping the gate.
So what kind of sensors are you using?
As I mentioned, there are different kinds of. There's light detectors, there are infrared detectors. There's also a slope detector, so a gyro sensor which measures gravity, if you like. Foot contact is like mechanical sensors. It just detects, it's an on-off sensor which detects whether you're on the ground or not. It now fell into a hole, and now it starts wiggling chaotically. Just this. There's no regular motion anymore. And this is initiated by if one of the foot contact sensors goes off for a substantial time period, which are longer than a typical lifting leg period, then it switches off the control, and because the basic state of the central pattern generator is chaotic, it just moves chaotically then. So the obstacle is now just a wall. Yeah? It just turns because it doesn't want to hit the wall. There are actually some experiments where there was sometimes it never runs into a hole, and sometimes it always runs into a hole and doesn't get out. Yeah? Of course, there are holes and situations where it doesn't untrap itself until after a long time. But the point in the advantage of chaos control untrapping is if you are in a hole where so the typical untrapping today is, until that study, was mostly done by periodic motion. So then you have two choices. Either you come out immediately, which is fine, or you essentially never come out because you just repeat your motion. And here you have more or less a guarantee that you're untrapped unless the hole is gigantically large. And we did some statistics on how untrapping in just more or less random holes. We done by, what is this, Stichsäge? So now it was again obstacle avoidance, and the other wall, it runs down. Maybe we can accelerate a bit. It changes the gate again on a down slope. It changes the gate again on the flat ramp, and you see the Workator lab also does car vision as visiting assistance, driving assistance. So this is
decision logic for the gate selection also implemented in the neural net.
What do you mean?
The logic that decides to change the gate.
No, there's no. So the association. This is very essential. The association of this. So this is the mapping at the moment. So far, what I've shown you so far is fixed. Yeah. So it decides if there's nothing special, you use period 5, which means tetrapod gate. There are other studies, which was known before, that certain periodic outputs, generically up to a period which is like about 10 or so, can easily be used for behavioral pattern generation with a fixed post-processing network. And we actually have a fixed network from, if you have the output of the central pattern generator, the output of the motor is determined. there's some processing, but it's fixed. There's no learning. There's also no influence on the sensors anymore.
But this logic is implemented in...
This logic comes from, no, it comes from the, I mean, it's, the association is fixed, so whether you want a certain periodic 5 output at nothing special or a type 8 output at upper slope, this is fixed, this is a table. It's pre-programmed, if you like.
Pre-programmed in what? In neural network or in C code?
No, it's the lookup table.
The lookup table.
Yeah, you look for, okay, there's the sensor signal is in this regime of your high dimensional space. So I want period 8, but then you...
It's a standard program.
Yes, it's a standard problem. Everyone does it like that. I will show that it's how you can modify it in a neuronal way in like 2 slides or so. So the message of this slide is there's a broad behavioral repertoire which can be generated by this autonomous system. So remember there's a single central pattern generator, and for this one you would have needed about 6 central pattern generators with standard methods.
Are these different attractors of the same dynamical system?
It is it's not an attractor, it's a chaotic system which can be stabilized to periodic orbits. So the chaotic attractor has intrinsic to it, most chaotic attractors have intrinsic to it a large set, typically infinite set of different periodic orbits. And what we do here is for a given environmental condition, we stabilize a certain type of orbit, for example, a 1 period 8 orbit for an upward slope. So then from the chaos, with a control signal, we generate a periodic orbit which is anyway within the chaos, but it's selected from the chaotic attractor more or less. Yeah?
And it's selected via control so that whenever it deviates too much from it, you push it back in.
Yes, exactly. It's non-invasive control. Oops. So in the sense that this is a time delayed feedback signal, if the period is 8 and you want period 8, then this difference is 0, and then the control signal here is proportional to the sum of these differences, and it's also 0. So there's no control if you're exactly on the periodic orbit, which is embedded in the chaotic dynamics. So that's called non-invasive control. Other people have tried to change the parameters of the system so that you move to a periodic regime or to a period 3 regime. But for this you have to have much more pre-knowledge of the system. Here you just need to know that it's chaotic. Yeah, as I've shown in the video, the chaos can also be constructively used if the robot falls into a hole with one of its legs. It loses foot contact for a longer time interval, then switches the control off. Because the central pattern generator ground state is chaotic, it becomes chaotic, and therefore also the motor output is chaotic because it's fixed post-processing. And by that it can successfully untrap itself. This is an example of a constructive use of chaos. And to your question, yes, the coordination, the mapping from environmental condition to which gate is appropriate can also be learned. And we've done 2 examples. Each of them typically take a while because you have to arrange things to learn different features. So this one is a simple, relatively easy to understand feature. You want to walk up a slope. Your goal is getting on the top of the hill, but at the same time you want to save energy, or actually power. You want to not minimize the power, but you want to keep your power within a certain bound. And on a flat terrain, you have a certain average usage of energy per time, which is marked here by plotting the actual average base current. This is a red line, and the black line is the actual current time resolved. Now the robot is entering a slope. And the strategy we have here, we have a random association of periods with the gates, and also a random trial of gates. The robot tries different gates it knows it has, in a random order, and then it selects Z1 with a low power consumption. So, and it's sufficiently low if the average power consumption falls back to the normal state where it was on the flat terrain. This is actually what humans do as well. You go slower and slower hiking up a mountain until your consumption is roughly at the same order of magnitude as you have in normal walking on a flat surface. Here it selects the period 4 orbit, which then switches to a certain gate. Then it's still the power consumption is still too high. So here it's on the ground level gate, so it didn't change until about here. On ground level, and you see the power consumption is much too high. Then it switches to period 4. It's still too high. It switches to period 5 to another gate. This is a motor output. It's still too high, and then it switches to period 9. And at that point, it's 9 happens to correspond to a slow wave gate, which is the lowest energy gate the robot has, and it then keeps it. So the power consumption goes even below, but roughly on the same order of magnitude as the base power consumption, and so it's satisfied and it doesn't change the gate anymore. If you would continue this experiment, it would just continue to keep the same gate. During switching, it learns because there's only a single central pattern generator. It can be learned easily by just Woodrow-Hoff delta rule, just one of the simplest learning rules you have. It just associates. So the idea is it just associates the synapse which corresponds to the slope sensor, make it stronger and stronger to try different periods. So it changes effectively the threshold of the neuron, one of the neurons, and so it changes the synapse, and then it keeps the synapse if it's no need to change anymore. So it associates this slope with this right low energy consuming gate. So now you put the robot back to the front of the experiment, it's done here, and it switches immediately to the base state, which is this gate, and then it encounters the slope again, and it immediately switches to the learned slow wave gate. And you see here that the energy consumption is actually stays essentially normal during slope, during the occurrence of a slope immediately. So it switches from here to there immediately. And I also have a video for that. I think this. Oops. So it's on the flat runner, it runs relatively quickly. Now it encounters a slope, and when the slope sensor is sufficiently long on saying slope, 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 then it switches. Still fast. Now it had switched. To a transition gate, but you see it's always still moving many legs at the same time, and you can imagine that the energy consumption is still large. This is again a different gate which still has a large energy consumption, and after some while it switches to the slow wave gate, which is the lowest because you always move one leg, so actually the increase of height per second is also the lowest. That's why physically it's using the least energy. Here you can also observe that moving it up a leg initiates a light, which you can use for fancy videos. Okay, now it stays in that gate. You all believe it, yeah? So I can just stays in the slow wave gate, and it has learned this behavior. It has associated this type of slope with the slow wave gate. And now this is Pyramid, our engineer. Now, well, He's at the university, and he built the thing. And now he repeats the experiment, and again the fast gate on the flat RML. Now it encounters the slope, and the slope sensor says, "Oh, slope, attention!" But the synapse has changed now, so it immediately knows which gate to take, and now it's already in the slow wave gate immediately. And it stays there, of course. Huh? Do you believe it? Yeah.
How different are these patterns? Can we interpret one behavior with something else? You know, let's say 4 is meant, but I understood it as 5. How different
They are as different as you see here. So.
Yeah, well,
What is the question? I mean, you can quantify it, of course, but then you have a quantity which tells you this is different. So 9 and 8, for example, is I think. No, where's 9? Oh, 9 is not on. But 9 and 8 is 2 different gates. One is slow wave, and the other is fast wave, if I'm not mistaken. And they look so similar. But I mean, we had also this. So this is how different they are. They are very different, but they are not drastically different in the sense they're not qualitatively completely. I mean, they're all one periodic. You put one leg up, and then the next time you put the leg, the period has completed. You could also think about periodic gates which are 2 periodic, so you have to put each leg twice to complete one cycle, and then you just repeat. But we didn't consider that. It's technically more complicated. And I think most of the animals don't do it in a typical situation. Horses can actually do that. You can train horses to automatically do that. Okay, so I've shown that extending nonlinear dynamics in a neuronal and adaptive way can contribute to progress for autonomous systems. In particular, there are certain advantages over single CPG approaches instead of over many CPG approaches. Instead of many CPGs, where you have one for each gate, we have only one CPG, which is chaotic, and you can select by control signals the periodic output. The system has a higher degree of versatility, and I think I can claim that the number of the different types of behaviors you can realize in an autonomous way here is current world record. Actually, it's 11 or 6 gates plus 5 different steering and so on motions. It's easily learnable because you have only one CPG. We use standard learning by Widrow-Hoff delta rule. The control is very flexible in the sense that you can easily add new types of behavior. If you want another gate, what you do is you pick another period which you have not used so far, like period 11 or 10. And then you associate 10 with a certain gate, which is, you can pick cleverly the periodic output to make it really simple for the motor post-processing. And then you just have another gate. It's also transferable to more or less lagged robots. To cars, we have done some simulations with car or certain type of vehicles. And my colleague Florentin Bergerter is working with Otto Bock Healthcare, actually an Austrian company, I think, on implementing similar ideas in all cases. Well, it's also chaos can also help to solve other kind of behavioral problems such as self-untrapping. Before I would like to come to acknowledgement, I would ask you, so this is our work on synchronization essentially, but currently we are focusing in the group on reconstructing network connectivity, which is like inferring the connection links from dynamical measurements. And my question is whether any one of you is involved with similar problems I would like to discuss, or maybe you can send me an email.
Explain a little bit.
Yeah, the question is, you have a neural network or some other black box where you can access the dynamics of the nodes, but you don't see the connections, and you want to know something about the connection. You want to know whether the connections are present or not, which connection is there and which is not. So we do it in different frameworks. So on oscillator networks, we've done it. For neural networks, spiking neural networks, we are just the first kind of progress. This is this 2010 paper.
A bit background. Would it be possible to explain a little bit what the meaning of this is, significance?
So yeah, for example, if in neural networks, you can the techniques to record from many neurons is rising rapidly. So you can go beyond 100 neurons recording at the moment, and 10 years ago you could do 4. The techniques to reconstruct anatomy it's also progressing, but it's much slower. You can do 1.5 neurons or something now with very much effort. And one of the questions is what the neural connectivity is. So can you measure, if you have the measured signals, dynamical signals, can you say something about the connectivity of the underlying network? And these kinds of problems are also present in other, at least biological systems. For example, gene and protein regulation networks. You have the same problem. You can measure the concentrations, but often you don't know the complete pattern of interactions. You know some of them, but several of them you don't know. And one of the, actually a group of Collins and co-workers from the United States, they try to infer connectivity, at least for small genetic networks, from their concentration patterns. From what they do, they change the concentration of 1 or 2 of the proteins or gene concentrations, and then they look for the dynamical change of them, and they follow the change, and they track back the topology. They've done it successfully in a 2005, I think, science paper with 9, I think 6 plus 3, 6 proteins and 3 genes or something. So this is a state of the art there. And the task is from the neural perspective, neural network perspective, to go to like 1,000 or more neurons and try to get the more or less complete connectivity out of it.
For a learning approach there, you have pairs of input patterns and output patterns. So if you just take a new neural network and use some standard learning algorithm to learn exactly these patterns, then a similar structure will evolve.
This is actually one of the approaches, is to make a clone of that and try to change the network until it does exactly the same, but it's a combinatorially explosive problem. So you have, if it grows combinatorially with the number of nodes you have, because essentially you have to try all networks. Not really, but
it's not trying; it's learning, like using backpropagation algorithms to teach the new network to learn the same behavior as the unknown one.
Yeah, but if you do, I mean, okay, maybe it's discussing. This was just a point to, maybe it's actually exactly what I want. I want to point to the problem. Maybe we can discuss it in break or something. Okay, today I've shown you that and how nonlinear dynamics can be used for autonomous systems control. We have also work, which I didn't show, on, well, maybe organic computing or natural computing. So we have a dynamical system, a network of formal neurons, which does naturally some computation, and the networks we consider are motivated from biological networks, so they are spiking neurons, and we are using so-called heteroclinic cycles, so quite complicated but easy to control types of dynamics, which generically could work as a universal computer, but also as a memory item. Maybe I have a chance to come back here in 1 or a few years to present the results. And I would like to thank the members of my group. In particular, I would like to also thank the 3 co-workers of the work I showed today, which is Florentin Burgerter. He's heading the group of biophysics and computation in Göttingen University. Promate Manupong, who is an engineer in Florentin's group, and Silke Steingrube, who was doing the numerical analysis and also lots of the implementation of the experiments of the robot. And of course, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.